that's not my microphone going like that. We're delighted to be here, the most beautiful panel, and obviously the most intelligent, influential, and probably the wealthiest. So I'd like to invite my wonderful speakers up to join me. I've got Teresa Ko from Freshfields. I've got Kai-Jin Ching from Christie's China, and I have Wenqi Yu from Banyan Advisory. So welcome to them. Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So we've come a long way, actually, and I just don't mean a long way as women. Actually, Jinqing just flew in from Paris, Wenqi just flew in from Bali. We've got Teresa in from Tokyo, and I just came from Sydney. So I hope there are some airline executives here that can come up and ask our views on what we think about long-haul travel, because we've got a lot to say. This is a great topic because I think that over the last few years, the world is starting to very slowly work out that women are very important decision makers when it comes to spending. You can see that we spend quite a lot on shoes up here, but that can go, there's a lot of other stuff that women are in control of in the household, in the business, in the family, and I think that's something we'd like to talk about here. It's almost 1 year to the day that the Boston Consulting Group published a paper called The Female Economy. And in that, they said that women control $20 trillion US of consumer spending, and that this figure was likely to go up to around 28 trillion in the next 5 years, and that's an awful lot of zeros. And the BCG report also said that companies do a very poor job servicing women, servicing us. So my three speakers know a lot about spending, as I said to you, and they know a lot about the way in which women spend in business, personally, and they also can put that in a broader context of their own sectors. So I just wanted to kick off. You can find out all about what they do and who they are and how qualified they are by looking in your program. I don't want to waste our valuable time going through their impressive CVs, but just take it from me, they're impressive. But I want to kick off by asking a question of each of them just about whether or not they think that female spending power is sufficiently understood. So this is just a question to them. Teresa, you're closest to me, so you're the first to go.
Thank you, Angela. Well, this is not a legal subject, so I have had to do some reading. And I came across this, actually, it's from a firm called Ginger Consulting, right? And this is right hot off the press. It's actually published in April this year. And it said, if women had a 25th hour in their day, it wouldn't be spending it on sex. 26% says they wouldn't. Friends, 2% said they would. Sorry, 6% says they wouldn't. And friends, 2%, or even the kids, 6%. Instead, they would be looking for more sleep, right? Who wouldn't? 24%, right? More time for fitness, 14%, and time with their significant other, which is good news, 12%. Now, but what is more interesting is that instead, they would want a great home, 48%, frequent vacations, 46%, and personal chefs and nutritionists, 28%.
Says a lot about who they canvassed.
Right, and not so much about the pampering at the spa, only 11%, or even a designer wardrobe, 16%, or perfect hair, which is only 15%. So now, obviously, it's one sort of research, but I personally think that whether they understand us or not, they're not doing enough to actually capture the market. Just one example, I think it's true to say that with working women in particular, where time is actually very tight, you know, whether it be financial services, healthcare, or even travel, in particular, on my experience is travel. I mean, if somebody could come up with, in fact, it's actually the next session, with bespoke, you know, service where you know exactly where is the best place to see, where are the best deals to have, instead of having to spend hours online searching, and you know, I'm sure a lot of women would be prepared to pay a little bit more for that service.
Thank you. Wenqi, what do you think? Do we understand?
I'll just tell a story. I think there is a computer company based in the United States. When they were thinking about selling their laptops to women, they paint their laptops pink.
Name and shame, Dell.
I didn't say that, and they failed. So I think that's a very good storytelling in terms of whether companies really understand what female consumers want or not.
So they don't, not enough research. And what about you?
Well, since I came from Beijing, I'll just give some, context about the Chinese women and the consumption. Chinese women now account for 74% of the workforce, so really has been actively participating and creating their contribution to the economy. And more than 54% of those women really contribute most of their income to the family income. And they're making 77% of the decisions. So if you are thinking about China being an emerging economy and booming consumer industry that create huge consumption power and set all kinds of trends for every brands in every sectors. Since I'm in the art sector, Christie's being the fine art auction houses, one of the leading auction houses in the world, we also try to tap into that market. And what we find out is as the spending power increases, the interest in arts and something beyond material consumption has really increased as well. And also their categories are more towards modern contemporary art categories. Traditionally Chinese collectors are primarily focused on Chinese painting and Chinese work of art. But what we are really finding out on the demand side is people are more into the contemporary and fashion, jewelry, and all the lifestyle categories now. And that really driven by the female interest in art market.
Right, we'll come back to that a little bit later. So that's an interesting start, but I'd like to know more about female entrepreneurship in Asia. And I think that we've got a lot of good examples of women in Asia who have done well, starting either with family money or starting on their own. But let's take the temperature of female entrepreneurship in Asia at the moment. I mean, Teresa, you're busy as a middle person helping companies and people have access to cash, whether it's listing or loans or whatever. What's your view?
There's a lot of them around, there's no doubt about that. And in fact, I can still remember very well one of my first IPOs I helped to take to the market. The owner was by then an elderly lady, and we just call her Mrs. Chan. And she's a property developer, and she told a fantastic story of how she started. And she would, when she was setting out, she was in her sort of early 20s, put together enough saving to buy units in these very dilapidated tenements. And then she would buy them and basically aggregate them. I mean, it's a business which is hard to do now. And then she would put down pins so that big property developers would have to negotiate with her. And over 30 years, she had accumulated amazing portfolio. And if you walk down Causeway Bay in Hong Kong, she owns most of it. Wow. So, that is just a prime example. And then the group is now managed and run by her daughter, so another woman. But over the years, names that I'm sure you have read about, even in the FT, Soho China, Zhang Xin, and the CFO, Yang, and in the internet space, Baidu, China's sort of search engine, the CFO, Jennifer Li, Alibaba CFO, Maggie Wu. You've heard about the recycling queen, Zhang Yin of Nine Dragon, and the restaurateur Sun Beauty, who is also Zhang Lian. There are endless, very successful entrepreneurs in China, and if you look at the internet space as well, a lot of small businesses are actually created by women. And then they have something that they either very passionate about or they have an idea and they put it online, and that's actually the start of a business.
Right. And that's, you see that pace increasing, the number of women that are in the entrepreneurial space increasing over, say, the last 5 years, 10 years?
Yes, and I think, China has some very impressive statistics, and in fact last year it made a significant increase in the number of women in senior management position. And it shot up from something like in the 20s percentage to over 50%. So I think when Chairman Mao said in 1968 that women holds up half the sky, he ought to be very happy today.
Thank you. Wenqi, you and I were talking before this panel a little bit about education being much more accessible to women in Asia now, particularly in Northern Asia. And you find that almost half of all graduates are women these days. But something kind of happens from their mid-20s to maybe their 40s. A lot of people seem to drop out of the workforce. I mean, there's a term for it called the leaky tap, which is probably got far too many connotations. But can you tell a little bit about what you think happens to these women and how we might be able to get them back into the economy and spending?
Well, I think if you look at developed economies in Asia, let's just use Japan and Korea as an example. In both countries, and actually most part of Asia, more than half of college graduates today are actually female. But what does that mean? How does that translate into their productivity and contribution to their society's economic growth? I think, Goldman Sachs' Kathy Matsui did a famous study a couple years ago saying in Japan, if they can close the gender gap in terms of labor participation, Japan's GDP growth would be 13% more. And that says a lot about how countries look at how they're going to utilize their talent or not. So that's one thing about, going back to Angela's question about female labor force and labor participation. But if you're looking at entrepreneurship, that's a really interesting phenomenon. On the other hand, entrepreneurship tends to be, we're defining it as women starting their own businesses or running their own businesses. That's a totally different game. It tends to be much harder for women. There's confidence issue, there's societal normative constraints to women in terms of encouraging them, whether it's to access their loans or having the networks and having the confidence to actually build up their own businesses. I think China is kind of an exception. According to recent studies, China actually as a country has way more female entrepreneurs compared to other countries.
Chairman Mao, can't go wrong.
Especially other developed economies. According to the most recent global entrepreneurship study, the GEM study, developed Asian countries actually have the smallest percentage of female entrepreneurs. Compared to developing economies in Asia. And you can argue a lot of them start their own businesses out of survival needs. So you see a lot of women, if they don't have professional educational opportunities, they tend to go back to start their own businesses in order to take care of their own families. That's a very interesting phenomenon. Compared to people who actually have better education and training, who would opt to join bigger corporations and maybe develop their own career from those bigger multinational type of companies. And entrepreneurship is directly linked to whether society supports innovation and creativity. So in Asian societies, I think one of the first panels talked about it as well. In Asian society, we're still very obsessed with brands, big names, status, and there's little room and less encouragement for creating your own space, creating your own brand. And that's certainly linked to why there's less encouragement for entrepreneurship or starting up companies. And I'm talking about generally speaking, of course, for the newer generation, we're seeing more younger people starting their own businesses. And in Singapore, I understand that the government also is trying to encourage that supporting environment.
Well, that segues nicely into creative industries and how that's been an enormous boom sector in Asia, and particularly in China, with Chinese contemporary art. And so what I'm interested in is, where are women sitting in that boom? Are they creating the art, increasingly creating the art, as well as investing in the art? I mean, what's that cycle looking like, Jinjin?
Well, overall, the Chinese artist has gained tremendous influence on the world stage, not only by the output of their artistic creation, but also the collectors, Chinese collectors, have participated very actively in the past 10 years in the global art market, which also gaining interest and gaining tractions and setting trends for art valuation and all the kind of art trends. As for women, I would say a lot of if you think about the artists, it's still quite famous artists are still quite male dominated, and but there are rising dynamic artists from China. I was trying to let me see if this work to show some of these artists that really has set new standard and new boundaries for creation. Lin Tianmiao, she is a very leading, well-known female installation artist. She just recently had her show in Asia Society Museum in New York, and is well sought after in a lot of global exhibitions. And her work really enlightened women. I mean, when we define, sort of redefine leadership of women, I think she set a perfect example of an individual who can inspire women in a very modern, transformative era. She used very traditional household objects, threads, silk, and household objects, and then she wrapped them up and really portrayed the conflicts of a lot of modern women, how to express their desire to be more liberated, independent, while still intertwined in the very traditional culture and value. So her work, is very focused on this type of expression of Chinese women in the art world. So it gives you a very, very clear idea of how these female artists are breaking new boundaries, and unique boundaries.
How much does her work fetch? How much is her, what's her market record?
I think her currently she does her majority of her work in the primary market, in the galleries.
Okay.
So which could be for her big installation, could be from from small to big, really depending on the work. But she's more a artist that really create a significant art historical value as well as commercial value. Very well balanced in terms of the talent.
How's she received in China itself? I mean, obviously externally, international investors find her interesting, as I know about her because I read about her. But what about domestically in China? How's that?
She's definitely represent a very bold, independent female artist expression. And that's what I mean. She really set a new sort of frontier for female artists, because she tackles these hard subjects, women in society and their transformative role in the society. And in a society that the changes has been so rapid, in the past 20 years. So from a very traditional women in the past generation, like mother's generation, who are used to, spending all their life trying to raise a future leader, to the new generation who, desires or intends to become a leader. So I think she's trying to capture that kind of sentiment in her artwork. And also I want to introduce another very famous female architect. We all know Zaha Hadid. And recently she's extremely active in China. She really set new city line in Beijing. You know, these two projects, which is so futuristic in its image, really creating a new sort of culture of how you express or use the architectural design language for future space. You know, her signature design are these really elongated curves of buildings and with multiple perspectives, as well as you know, the curvy lines to really create an expression of the chaos in modern society. But when you're in those spaces, they're open, spacious, welcoming, very minimalist, simplistic approach, which fit perfectly in today's you know, office life. Very, very creative, and also you know, won numerous awards globally, including the Pritzker Award. She was the first woman to win that, and several other awards. And you know, these are two projects that actually developed by a female developer, which is Zhang Xin, you know, a billionaire, self-created billionaire, one of the top richest women in the world. Actually, talking about that, on the top richest women list, there are so many female Chinese women. Of the top 5, 3 of them are Chinese. And you can see, you know, when these businesswomen are gaining influence, they also created platform for creative forces created by women in that sense. Really, you know, created opportunities for them to express their talents. So I think in today's China, we are very blessed as Chinese women to be given so much great opportunities in private sector, in arts, business, as well as education. So, you know, there's no limit except ourselves.
That's right. I suppose it's taking nurturing, which is always something that women are said to do well, to a whole new level, right? Let's turn to a little bit more prosaically to women in everyday corporate life. There's plenty of research that shows that boards that have a great spread of influences, be they women, men, different ethnicities, people who are strong in the arts but they're on a bank board, etc. People who bring different talent. Of course, women is the most, I suppose, vocal topic out there at the moment. Should there be mandatory women on boards quotas in countries where there are stock exchanges that have stock exchange listing rules, etc., etc. So is that artificial, or is that something we should be pushing for because ultimately it's going to benefit shareholders because those companies tend to have higher share prices and a better run? What do you think, Teresa?
Before I answer you that question, I just
You'll
want
answer your own
to
question.
make an observation. I think it's important that we all kind of agree that women in business make sense. I think.
Okay, can I have a show of hands?
Disagree
Who
with
thinks
that?
it's a good idea to have women in business? Okay, right.
Right.
So what do the rest of you think? The rest of you are out.
Well, I'm not so sure, right?
No lunch for anyone that didn't put their hand up.
Personally, I think it does make a lot of business sense because, guess why? We've just heard, actually, the consumers, half of them, if not half of them, I mean, Taiying just said that 70%. Making household decisions, spending decisions. I'm sure in reality it's a lot more than that, a lot higher than that. So, and I just want to give you one example, which I stumbled into in my reading. H&M, right? I mean, everybody must have either know or heard of that shop, even the men. H&M, yes?
H&M, yeah.
H&M, right. 80% of their staff are women, right? Including 77% of all the store managers are women, right? And what is very impressive is that they have a board of 11 members, and 7 are female, right? So now, but if you look at the boards around the world, This is exceptionally exceptional. No. Because I think, you know, we talked about 30%, some have to legislate, and regulatory pressure does help. And a case in point is France. The French legislation was passed about 2 years ago, and requiring that within 3 years, all boards have to have at least 20% women. And that 20% is going to rise to 40% in 6 years, in fact in 4 years' time. And this has given a bit of a lift, so that the percentage of women on boards has now increased to 16%. It's had a 4% jump in 1 year. Likewise in Hong Kong, 10 years ago, in 1993, there is an average of 0.43% of a woman.
That's
not
odd.
every board.
Half a woman sitting in a board.
It's not even half, right? It's 0.43%. And now it's not that great, but it's now risen to 0.9%.
So they're just lacking one eye.
So nearly one. There is nearly a woman on every board. And 10 years ago, 70% of all the listed companies in Hong Kong didn't have women. And now the percentage is a little bit more respectable, it's still not great, it's 39% didn't have women. Okay? So, but the more respectable statistics on our 1,573 listed companies on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, 16% had 2 women, 38% had 1 director, and only 39% doesn't have any women director, right? So progress is being made, but probably a lot more slower than we'd like to see. So that leads us to the question of quota. Now, personally, I'm against quota because I do think that there will always be this question for the women on boards as to whether they're there because they're the best person, you know, for the job, or whether they're just to tick the box or fill in a quota. So I personally don't think it is the right approach. Peer pressure, regulatory pressure, because about a year ago, Hong Kong Stock Exchange did pull out a rule to require listed companies not to have women on board, but to disclose their diversity policy, which I think is a much better approach, and it's a broader approach because, as you know, diversity embraces age, gender. Gender is only one of the factors that should be taken into consideration. Background, culture, religion, education, a whole spectrum of it. But unfortunately, the quality of the disclosure has been a little bit disappointing. It's been a case of, seeing who else has written about it, and let's either do a copy or paste, or, and tweak it a little bit. But I think the opportunity is there for a company to really look at the, what their requirements should be, and bring in more talent and then enhance the board. But I think I would also think that quotas may be more appropriate for government committees or advisory boards, where there is less public pressure and less market pressure. But if things don't improve, I think it may well be that that's the only way to make a step change.
What about you, Wendy? What do you think? You've just come out of living in the States for 12 years. Do you think that the US is leading the world in this change, this step change in diversity?
I think anything related to quota is going to be hard to pass in the United States. That's the way it operates in our country. The quota system in terms of board diversity actually comes out of Norway. I think in 2002, Norway was the first country that started this conversation about having about 40% of your board members being female. And it wasn't mandatory. So 3 years later, nothing really changed. I think it increased to about 10%. So that's when they started introducing the legislation, mandating 40% of the corporate boards being female. And a few years later now, most of the Norwegian companies actually have reached that quota.
So are they hiring the same women? I mean, is there a big enough pool? I often wonder that it's the same girls getting picked every time.
Yes. So
I should move to Norway.
So unfortunately, it becomes similar women who actually, in the beginning, sit on the same, different boards because the pool is smaller. But that begs the question whether, why the pool is smaller, or if you're just looking at the same women instead of reaching out. I think that's the big question. The whole quota concept is to encourage people to reach out and look more seriously. Christine Lagarde actually always tells this very interesting story. When she was being interviewed by the IMF board, all the board members, not a single one was women. And when she came to the IMF and she asked, to find some candidates, and she without asking, entire binder presented to her for senior level positions, they were all men. And of course, the search was conducted by men. And so she asked, where are the female candidates? And those men kind of, couldn't really say why and just said, oh, we couldn't find any. So she said, look harder. And it came back with more female candidates. So the question is whether you're looking harder or not. Yeah. And I think it reflects some female perspective in the whole search process as well. I don't want to pick a side in terms of whether having a quota is better or not. Every country, every society is different in terms of the way it works. But I do think having the conversation is very helpful. In the end of the day, it's not about diversity for the sake of diversity. It really is about making business sense. Having different perspectives, whether it's gender, race, age, or other issues, it helps the decision-making process. And nowadays people are talking about Twitter. Twitter is about to go public, and there's not a single board member that's female. Even when Facebook went public, it was the same question, where are the women? And so I think it's healthy to have those conversations, and whether having more women on the board really drive business bottom line. There are different research studies showing that, but I think we do need more evidence to support that. That's when the market and the businesses truly change their behavior.
You're bursting to say something. I want to ask you, what people say.
Right, I was going to say that it's absolutely right that we need to look at the supply side as well. Because there's no point in saying that we need more women, and need more women, but the community, society doesn't do anything to help on the supply side.
Unless you're the Financial Times and you start a non-executive director's diploma course, which we have in London and in Hong Kong now. Little party political broadcast there.
I knew you were going to mention that, and I did say it for that. I was going to actually mention, courses like, the FT Online program, or actually a lot of courses actually put together by a search firm. And in fact, I know that there is a graduate of one such program in the audience. And I think it is important to also encourage businesses to put in place the initiatives which are going to help women to get through their career. In fact, there are a lot of thinking that has been gone into the legal profession, for instance, to make sure that you retain as many as those of the female who join the profession. In fact, the statistics are that develop in whether it's US, UK, or even in Hong Kong, or possibly even in China. But because men and women are different, we have to, if you're married, or even if you're not married these days, have children, and that takes you out. And then, the impact of this double burden is real. The domestic responsibility, particularly in an Asian setup, the pressures if you're married from mothers-in-laws and the family, your extended family, and your parents and grandparents. So we need to do more, and businesses need to do more to almost support the female kind of like workforce throughout their different career cycle, so that the leaky pipe wouldn't happen as much as it's done in the past.
But surely in China, it's all about depending on your extended family to look after your children so you don't drop out of the workforce. I mean, is that why there's such a burgeoning entrepreneurial spirit there? Because there is this amazing support network for people.
I think it's that, but it's also, strong commitment from the very top, whether you're a business or you're an organization. Of the 70% workforce and 50% of the senior management are female, actually only 8% are among the board are female. So there's still a long way, to really achieve a more balanced, sort of representation of women at the board level. But I think, come back to the quota question, it's definitely a business imperative. I mean, think about our business today and in the future. It's more and more creative and innovative. And for this kind of environment, you really require very diverse, very dynamic, and very distinct, sort of culture. And by including women, including different background in the workforce, in the board level, it will definitely make sense and making more creative sense and create more artistic vision as well for any organizations.
I want to ask a question of each of you before we run out of time. I want to start with you, Jinqing. I mean, just because we're all good consumers and we consume a lot, is there an opening in the market that you've seen, an opportunity that the business community could be doing that would service you better as a consumer?
I think I'm looking for more personalized, bespoke services of any kind in lifestyle. So I actually look for very unique and could be just a niche brand. And oftentimes they may be created by women, whether it's travel, like the Wild China, Miss Germany created a terrific service, travel services, to spa, to healthcare, and products and services.
Right, so that's what you'd like. What would you like, Richie?
I actually think the media, especially the movies and TV shows, it's very hard to identify figures that I feel I can relate to.
Do you watch Nashville?
I don't.
Well, there are a lot of strong women in Nashville.
But I mean, that's the thing. Either they're super strong, powerful women, or they're very weak women, or they're portrayed to be sort of, those very sexy objects. It's very hard to find something that's normal in my view. Like that's more like an average woman.
And what about you? When you mentioned travel, you want someone to give you your travel solutions on a plane. You're happy to prepare more for that. Anything else?
Yes, and I think generally speaking, I think more bespoke approach with working women. And women work in a professional field, and then track their different development, whether they be fresh graduates or in their mid-30s, in the middle part of the career where they are have to juggle and multitask like madness, and then the empty nesters, professional women that have more time because they don't have as many domestic responsibilities and become a bit more affluent because they have got to become more senior and hopefully have a higher earning power. But generally, at the end of the day, I wish somebody would focus on working women when they want just a simple, nice but special suit to go to the office. So
it's just identified a business opportunity for yourself, actually. I'm just going to talk about it over lunch. But thank you very much to my wonderful panel. I've got the flashing red light down here.